What if I told you that fascism isn't just a thing of the past? In fact, it's making a dangerous comeback today. Around the world, authoritarian leaders are using tactics that resemble those of Mussolini, Hitler, and other fascist rulers. You might think fascism is just about dictators and violence, but there's much more to it. It's about control of the media, control of the people, and control of the economy. Did you know that in 2020, nearly 50 countries were reported to be experiencing an erosion of democracy? That's a shocking 25% of the world's nations. Fascism doesn't always look like stormtroopers marching on the streets. It's a slow, insidious process that starts with words, then grows into fear, division, and totalitarian rule. In this video, we'll break down the 6 tactics fascists use to seize and maintain power. From the seductive force of nationalism to the terrifying silencing of opposition, these are the strategies that have helped fascism thrive through history, and how they're being used today. Stick around as we uncover the dangerous playbook of fascism, and learn how to spot these tactics before it's too late. Chapter 1. Unmasking the wolf in sheep's clothing. The appeal of nationalism. Fascism often hides its true nature behind the appealing mask of nationalism. It's a simple trick that plays on the hearts of people who feel alienated or fearful about their future. The promise of restoring national greatness speaks to those who long for a sense of belonging and pride. But nationalism, as used by fascists, is often a tool for manipulation. In the 1930s, Benito Mussolini and Adolf Hitler both presented themselves as the saviors of their nations, claiming to restore lost glory. When a country is in turmoil, nationalism is a seductive cure. It brings people together with the idea of common identity and shared destiny. However, fascists twist this by narrowing the definition of us and creating an other. Whether it's ethnic minorities, immigrants, or political opponents, the fascist version of nationalism thrives on division. National pride becomes a justification for exclusion and violence. Studies have shown that people who feel economically insecure are more likely to support nationalist rhetoric, which feeds into fascist propaganda. What makes this even more dangerous is how fascist leaders often equate their personal image with the nation's identity. Hitler, for example, wasn't just seen as the leader of Germany, he was Germany. His rise to power was built on the illusion that the nation's future and his destiny were one and the same. That kind of power dynamic makes it harder to question the regime. Moreover, fascists will often use national pride to justify military aggression. History shows us how fascist leaders can rally support for wars by appealing to a sense of national superiority. Mussolini's invasion of Ethiopia in 1935 was framed as a campaign to restore the glory of the Roman Empire, invoking the pride of Italy's past to cover up imperial ambitions. The most unsettling part is how easily this tactic works. A 2017 study found that in many cases, people who felt their nation's greatness was under threat were more likely to support nationalist and authoritarian policies. This shows just how vulnerable societies are to manipulation when their collective identity is at stake. Nationalism is powerful, and when it's combined with fascism, it can be deadly. Chapter 2. The Cult of Personality. How dictators become untouchable icons. One of the most defining features of fascism is the rise of a singular leader, someone who becomes an untouchable icon. The fascist leader isn't just a politician, they are a symbol of the nation's strength and future. This cult of personality is central to fascism's survival. Mussolini wasn't just Italy's dictator, he was the embodiment of Italian strength. His famous slogan, "Mussolini is always right," was not just a reflection of his ego, but a way of asserting control over the public's perception. Fascist leaders master the art of self-promotion, often exaggerating their achievements and demonizing any criticism. Hitler's portrayal as the infallible Führer led many Germans to believe that anything he did was for the greater good. In fascism, the leader becomes synonymous with the state, and any attack on the leader is viewed as an attack on the nation itself. This phenomenon is not confined to the past. Modern autocrats like Vladimir Putin have demonstrated similar tactics. Putin has carefully crafted an image of strength and control, often presenting himself as Russia's protector against foreign enemies. Studies show that in countries where leaders have been able to build strong cults of personality, dissent is often crushed, and opposition becomes politically dangerous. Fascist leaders go to great lengths to manipulate public perception, presenting themselves as the only ones capable of solving national crises. They use every form of media to perpetuate this narrative. In today's world, social media plays a significant role in creating these larger-than-life personas. Leaders like Trump and Bolsonaro have used Twitter to project an image of authority and dominance, effectively turning social media platforms into propaganda tools. The psychology behind the cult of personality is chilling. Authoritarian leaders often use fear to establish their power, but they also offer a sense of certainty and security in an unpredictable world. In times of economic instability or social unrest, people are more likely to turn to strong figures who promise solutions, no matter how extreme. This makes the cult of personality a potent weapon for fascist regimes. Chapter 3: Fear is Power. How Fascists Weaponize Fear and Divide Society. Fear is one of the most powerful tools in the fascists' arsenal. Fascists know that people in fear are more likely to accept authoritarian rule. To do this, they often create imaginary enemies. These enemies are portrayed as existential threats to the nation's very survival. For example, Hitler used Jews as the scapegoats for Germany's economic struggles, and Mussolini vilified socialists and communists as dangerous radicals. This tactic is not new. Fascist regimes throughout history have thrived on creating fear and division. In 1930s Germany, the Nazis created an atmosphere of fear around supposed Jewish conspiracy theories, rallying the population around the idea that they were under siege. By portraying Jews as the cause of economic hardship, they justified extreme measures that led to violence and oppression. Today, we see a similar pattern. In many modern autocracies, fear is weaponized through misinformation and targeted propaganda. Media outlets controlled by fascist regimes often focus on exaggerating threats, whether it's a refugee crisis, terrorism, or an economic collapse, creating a sense of panic. The more fearful a society becomes, the more willing people are to accept harsh measures in the name of security. Fear can also be used to divide society. Fascists often amplify societal divisions by focusing on race, religion, or political ideology. They use these divisions to create in-groups and out-groups, pitting citizens against each other. This results in a more fragmented society, where unity is impossible, and the state becomes the only force capable of restoring order. This strategy can be highly effective, especially when people feel insecure about their future. A 2021 study revealed that countries with higher levels of economic uncertainty tend to see an increase in populist, often fascist, political movements. When people feel their jobs are at risk, or their communities are under threat, they turn to leaders who promise to protect them, no matter the cost. Fascists use this fear to consolidate power and justify the dismantling of democratic institutions. Fear, combined with division, is a devastating tool. It creates a sense of urgency that undermines rational thinking and encourages blind loyalty to authoritarian figures. Fascists understand that when society is paralyzed by fear, they can implement their radical ideas without resistance. If you're finding this analysis helpful, don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more insights into how fascism works today. Chapter 4: Controlling the Narrative. The fascist grip on media and information. A fascist regime's control over the media is one of its most crucial strategies. By shaping public perception, fascists can manipulate how people think and feel about politics, society, and the world around them. The media becomes a powerful tool for spreading propaganda and controlling the narrative. In Nazi Germany, Goebbels, Hitler's minister of propaganda, understood this well. He said, "The most brilliant propagandist technique will yield no success unless one fundamental principle is borne in mind constantly. It must confine itself to a few points and repeat them over and over." This repeated messaging made fascism more digestible and easier to accept for ordinary people. Fascists don't just use media to spread messages, they use it to shape reality. They create a controlled version of truth, one where their actions are justified, and any criticism is silenced or discredited. For example, during Mussolini's rule in Italy, the state took over newspapers and radio, ensuring that only pro-fascist content was broadcast. Critics were silenced or forced to conform. Fast forward to today, we see similar tactics used in countries like Russia, where independent media outlets are systematically suppressed, and state-controlled media dominates. The impact of media control is far-reaching. Studies show that when the government controls the media, it often leads to a more passive, uninformed populace. According to a report by the Committee to Protect Journalists, authoritarian regimes are twice as likely to imprison journalists who challenge their power. This ensures that any alternative voices are removed, and the public is left with only one narrative, the one that supports the regime's agenda. What's more alarming is how fascists adapt to new technologies. In the age of social media, regimes are using platforms like Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram to spread disinformation quickly and effectively. In 2016, fake news campaigns during the US election were a prime example of how digital media can be weaponized for political gain. Fascist movements around the world have learned to use social media algorithms to amplify their messages and drown out opposition voices. By controlling the media, fascists don't just spread lies, they create a climate of fear and mistrust. They can paint opponents as traitors or enemies of the state, making it dangerous for anyone to speak out. As the media becomes the mouthpiece of the regime, the truth becomes whatever the leader says it is, and dissenters are silenced before they can speak. Chapter 5: The Destruction of Dissent. Silencing opposition with force and fear. A fascist regime cannot thrive if dissent is allowed to flourish. Therefore, one of their main tactics is to destroy any opposition, often through violence, fear, and legal manipulation. Fascists aim to create an environment where resistance is not just difficult, it's impossible. Mussolini's black shirts were infamous for using violence and intimidation against political opponents, labor unions, and anyone who challenged fascist ideology. This tactic often begins with the criminalization of dissent. In fascist regimes, speaking out against the government isn't just unpopular, it's dangerous. Under Hitler, the Nazis passed laws that targeted Jews, communists, and other political dissidents. Those who spoke out were often imprisoned, sent to concentration camps, or executed. Similarly, in modern authoritarian states, laws are often created that give the government the right to label any opposition as a threat to national security. These laws are used to justify arrests, censorship, and state-sanctioned violence. But fascists don't just rely on legal measures, they also use brute force. The infamous Gestapo, Nazi Germany's secret police, was notorious for silencing opposition through torture, intimidation, and murder. Today, many authoritarian leaders have their own versions of the Gestapo. In Belarus, for example, President Alexander Lukashenko's regime has used violence and arrest to suppress protests, making it clear that any challenge to the government will be met with extreme consequences. Fear is a key tool here. If people are afraid to speak out because they fear imprisonment, violence, or even death, they will keep quiet. This is what fascists want. In countries where fascism has taken root, fear silences even the most courageous opponents. A study by the International Federation for Human Rights found that over 100 journalists were killed in 2019 alone for trying to expose corruption and injustice. These deaths send a chilling message: dissent equals danger. If you want to stay informed about how fascism can impact our world today, make sure you subscribe and hit the notification bell so you don't miss our future content. Chapter 6: The Corporate Fascist Alliance. How corporations feed the beast. Fascism isn't just about power, it's also about control over resources. One of the more insidious tactics used by fascist regimes is the establishment of a corporate fascist alliance. This strategy involves forging relationships between the government and big corporations, with both benefiting from the other's power. In Nazi Germany, for example, the Nazi regime worked closely with powerful corporations like Krupp and IG Farben, which provided the military-industrial complex with weapons, chemicals, and other materials used in the war effort. The idea behind this alliance is simple: fascist governments provide corporations with the protection they need to operate freely, while corporations fund and support the regime. In return, corporations often receive state contracts, favorable laws, and a free hand in exploiting workers and resources. In Mussolini's Italy, companies were encouraged to form syndicates with the government to manage economic production. This gave the state control over both the workforce and the means of production. This partnership is not just historical, it's happening today. In many modern fascist states, corporations play a key role in supporting the regime. In Russia, for example, Vladimir Putin has fostered close relationships with oligarchs, granting them immense wealth and power in exchange for their political loyalty. Similarly, in Turkey, President Erdogan's government has given preferential treatment to businesses that align with his policies, further consolidating his control. What's particularly troubling about this corporate fascist alliance is its impact on workers and ordinary citizens. Corporations under fascist regimes are often free to exploit workers without fear of reprisal. Workers' rights are stripped away, and labor unions are either destroyed or co-opted. Fascists view workers as tools to further the state's goals, not as people with rights and dignity. In modern China, the government maintains tight control over labor and business, while offering corporations massive incentives to support the regime's goals. To continue learning more about these vital topics and their relevance in today's world, be sure to subscribe for more content.